Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate enormously the work our great education chair, Shelley Mayer, did during this whole debate, and the work she did trying to fight for the best possible outcome she could get for public education throughout the budget process. And to start, I will be voting for this bill. But I must also clearly state my objection to the substantial equivalency changes that Senator Mayer also just addressed. And people stand on the floor of the Senate for many reasons: to debate, to clarify their positions, to get in the press. I'm here for a very specific reason. Courts use what is said on the floor of the Senate when determining their understanding of the debate or the leading up to changes in law in court cases. I very much am hoping the courts challenge what we are doing today, and so I want to go on record for some future court case. The issue is not religious freedom. This issue is about a child's right to an education, beginning, end, period. People are free to practice their religion in New York State. They are not free to withhold an education from their children. That is called educational neglect, and it is unconstitutional in our state, as has been proven in court. That is the issue, and that is where this bill language goes terribly wrong. The Court of Appeals, New York's highest court, established in the Campaign for Fiscal Equity case that under New York's Constitution, all of its children have a positive right to a sound basic education, and that New York has a duty to provide it to them. All children in New York have the right to a basic education that includes English, math, science, and history. This legislation undermines that constitutional guarantee, trading away children's futures for political expediency. The court defined the constitutional right in terms of civic education, i.e., a sound basic education means the skills students need to function productively as civic participants capable of voting and serving on a jury. Children deprived of a basic education cannot be expected to do that. Existing education law balances that right with the right of parents to direct their children's education and the interests of all New Yorkers in ensuring our children are educated by requiring all private schools to provide an education that is at least substantially equivalent to that of our public schools. To abandon that balance in favor of appeasing extremists who fear teaching English, math, and science or classifying doing so as woke is a direct assault on the futures of tens of thousands of children. This proposal would do away with that balance by redefining substantial equivalency. It robs the Board of Regents and the New York State Education Department of their roles enforcing the educational law, and creates an education policy by substituting the judgment of educators for that of politicians. This represents a stain on our state's long-standing commitment to equity and opportunity. Under this bill, schools deemed substantially equivalent may still not provide the sound basic education that our children deserve, and the objection of complaining parents would fall on deaf ears, as the New York Education Department would be precluded from enforcing the law and finding those schools to be non-equivalent. The legislature should not bind our education experts' hands in such a fashion. The proposed bill renders large parts of the existing education law moot. Under current law, a school failing to teach civics, American and New York history, important foundation documents, and critical points in history like the Holocaust would be deemed non-equivalent. Under the proposed bill, a school may evade that law in any number of ways, such as by having as few as 1/3 of its students score as proficient on tests the schools themselves get to choose. Society's interest in ensuring all students are prepared to function as members of civil society is at stake. What the new language in this bill does is define as substantial equivalent education may not suffice as a sound basic education as we know it, as exists in our law, and has been established in our courts. The bill is a result of intense lobbying of one specific interest group. If adopted, it disadvantages a specific minority that cannot speak for itself. Students at a small number of New York's Haredi and Hasidic yeshivas. It is their futures that members of the legislature are keen on selling for political gain through a closed-door process that evades scrutiny by the people the legislature represents. I'm a Jew. I'm the child of immigrants, well, grandchild of immigrants. They all came here for a better life. They focused on education. Many of them did not get an education, but they fought to make sure their children and grandchildren did, as so many of us did in our own history. I want to point out that they would have never accepted this for their own children or grandchildren. I would like to point out that even some of the legislators who are supposedly supporting this, but I don't think any of them want to identify, would never send their own children to these schools. Never send their own children to these schools because they understand the importance of making sure their children have a good, sound education. This bill is actually anti-Semitic because it's targeting a sub-universe of young Jewish children from getting their rightful education in New York State. This will have a disparate impact on this insular minority and traditionally marginalized group. It will also, because it extends the number of years before anyone is looking at all for up to literally a decade, it not just shortchanges these children, but it also has devastating consequences in certain communities, such as East Ramapo, which has come up already quite a bit. It will have devastating consequences for the Black and brown kids in East Ramapo, whose resources and funding have been almost entirely cut off to fund these yeshivas that often are not even meeting substantial equivalency. So they are now incentivized to continue their bad behavior and will be also incentivized to continue to starve the remainder of the school district from meeting its children's needs. And so it's a circle that just keeps spreading its damage. We should not be doing this. It's particularly the wrong time because we're on the cusp of the U.S. Supreme Court making a decision about whether they are going to allow or require religious schools to become charter schools using government funds for their education. With this change in law, we're actually saying, here in New York, if you define yourself as a religious school and you aren't meeting our most basic minimal standards for actual education, come on down, because now you'll sign up to be a charter and you'll use radically more of our our state education funding, moving it out of public education into these religious charters if apparently one more Supreme Court judge decides to rule on this case in favor of the religious charter schools. So we're opening up a Pandora's box, much, much larger than anyone seems to understand the implications of this today. I tried to stop this from being in the budget. I failed. This is why I am trying to make clear that we are going to need the courts to overrule what we are doing today for the sake of not just the children who are now going to those schools, but for all our children. Thank you, Madam President.